Well, welcome everyone to this, the now sixth episode of COVID Connect. It's April 24th, 2020. And as always, want to start out by acknowledging the group of community collaborators who came together to get the very first of these events started. You can see many of their organizations on the page and many more who sent out email blasts late at night as we all tried to figure out what to do, how we could connect together as a community. So this is something much bigger than each one of us. And I'm so thankful to each one of you who has participated and shared information and shared ideas. So this has just been great. And we've met lots of cool people and lots of cool projects over the course of this and put a lot of people in touch with each other. And what I want to do, as we normally do, is to remind you that the webinar will be available at intobeing.com/COVID Connect. If you scroll down to the bottom of that page, you'll be able to find all the previous webinars with all of the contact lists, as well as the links to the videos and more. So please do use the chat box, put in whatever information you want to put in about your efforts, your needs, information you want people to know. And if you need to get hooked up with somebody who you heard on the webinar, reach out on that chat box. The contents of the chat box and the information you put in there will be appended to the Excel spreadsheet that's hung with each webinar. And what that will do is it'll allow you to get in contact with people who've been on these previous webinars and reach out to them. If we invite you on either as a guest or during the community forum, be sure you're off mute when you do and make sure that your headphones are on or you're sufficiently isolated from the audio. And if you're coming in during the open forum, keep it relatively brief, your name, your company, your needs, your efforts and ideas, and we'll continue that great resource to connect the community together. Just a reminder, Into Being, we do medical device development. We've been on so many phone calls recently working with people just to help them understand the process. And we are happy to be here for helping you if that's what's needed. But don't feel like you're going to get a bill if you call us. We're just trying to help right now and help people to understand these EUAs, as are many today. I've just been overwhelmed by the number of people who are reaching out in the community, just offering their services, trying to put two and two together and make things better for our healthcare providers and for everybody else. So I want to tell you a little bit about the news today that we're hearing. Let's see, we're going to do a slightly different share here. We are going to share this. The first one is that this from RAPS, but many of you will be interested to know that the medical device regulation, as well as the IVDR, the IVD regulation that has been coming in Europe, and many of us have been watching with great interest, is getting pushed back by a year. So many people, I think, thought that this was going to be a good idea anyways, but I think COVID has pushed it over the edge, and it was a unanimous vote by the European Council to push back the rollout of MDR and IVDR for medical devices and for in vitro diagnostics in Europe out by a year. So that will probably be welcome news to many. Next, we wouldn't normally belabor this, but the news just came out this morning and the details are just coming out as we speak. So we'll read through this really briefly. Governor Whitmer's latest stay-at-home order does have us sheltering in place still through the 15th. This from MLive. Some changes: short-term housing or vacation rentals are now prohibited. Masks are much more mandated than they were before, and that will go into effect basically midnight Sunday. Allowed to travel between residences in Michigan. State parks are still open. Garden stores, nurseries, lawn care, pest control, and landscaping can return to work under social distancing guidelines. Bicycle maintenance and repair shops may reopen. Moving and storage workers may resume working under social distancing guidelines. Maintenance workers and groundskeepers, who are necessary, may return. And golf courses are allowed to reopen, although golf carts are not allowed. And boating is now okay again, as well as addiction recovery meetings, as long as they are less than 10 people. And large stores can now start selling carpeting, paint, and furniture again. Again, we wouldn't usually belabor that, but that news, that article there is about 45 minutes old, so we thought you might be interested to hear the latest while you're joining us here on COVID Connect today. Wanted to pass this on. Ford's been doing a lot of cool stuff, and although we weren't able to get anybody from Ford today, we did get a lead that the Ford Innovative Ideas program is open, and I think it's been there, and they're happy to take ideas from folks. It's different than I want to become a supplier, I want to be hired by Ford. This is really just an ideas portal that's, I guess, getting a lot of traction for them, and so we thought we'd share that again here. It's ford.com/innovation. We wanted to pass on this information, and I think this will become a larger part of the conversation as we go forward. The PPE shortage has made us all wake up and realize that better solutions need to be there. Some of those may be onshore solutions, some of those may be other sources. Hospital in Texas, by this article by Roxanne Comsey at Medium, is fascinating because there's a hospital in Texas that has been using, it's the Texas Center for Infectious Disease. They've been using a reusable respirator. These filters last for a year. I believe they're N99s actually, not just N95s. And the staff is required to sanitize their own inner mask and reuse the filters for up to a year. And they've been getting tons and tons of attention over this, but we thought it was worth sharing that there are some reusable respirators out there that can go for an entire year, providing N95 plus levels of respiration. So that's pretty cool. This from NASA, they're getting in on the Ventilator Act. We've been keeping up to date on who's got a ventilator out there that's gotten cleared under the EUA. And NASA is getting in on the act, and I have to thank my dear mother and father who tune into this program every week with us for passing that on. That's neat to see NASA doing that, and we'll see when they get their EUA as a part of this. Finally, and this was triggered originally by a comment that Nikki Kennedy made to me. Thank you, Nikki, that Ascension Health still needs wipes potentially. As I was looking around, it turns out that the state of Michigan has a tracking page now, and I hope you will all log into this and look at it if you are data people like I am. And this shows us for Region 1, Region 2, Region 3, Region 5, Region 6, 7, all throughout Michigan, things like the total number of hospital beds. You can see all the information, how many mechanical ventilators they have, how many available ventilators they have. As we get down lower here, there's a table I want to share with you. Gloves, goggles, N95 respirators, down to PAPR batteries. You can see the number that are available and what percentage of the hospital systems are reporting at the moment. Here's the definition of the regions. And down here, this is a very useful table. I hope that some of you who have PPE to distribute will look at this table and make some contacts. We have here from the state of Michigan that days on hand, PPE days on hand as of 4/23, that's as of yesterday. Beaumont is down to 0 to 6 days of surgical masks. Bronson is down to 0 to 6 days of surgical masks, as well as gloves over here. Deckerville Community Hospital is down to 0 to 6 days of surgical masks. Harbor Beach Community Hospital, 0 to 6, as well as 0 to 6 of face shields. So all of those of you that we've met who are making face shields, you might want to look these folks up and see if we can get some face shields to them. Hurley Medical Center, both the surgical masks and surgical gowns shortage, as well as Kalkaska Memorial Health Center. Looks like they need pretty much everything at the moment. McLaren needs surgical masks. Michigan Medicine, surgical masks as well as gloves. Mid-Michigan Health, surgical masks as well as gloves. Oaklawn Hospital needs face shields. Schroer Hospital needs surgical masks. Looks like our friends over at Spectrum could use some more surgical gowns. And that looks like all of the Three Rivers Health as in need of N95 masks, and UP Health is in need of gloves. This is a wonderful table. Look at it. We'll put the link in the links page that we maintain at Intubing's website. Please go look at this. If you have PPE to distribute, please go and prioritize those who are getting low on those resources. That would be a wonderful, wonderful resource, and I'm sure that they would welcome hearing from you. So that's a great thing. You can also see the patient census, those patients who have COVID, and whether they're in the normal hospital or the ICU, as well as bed occupancy. So we can see now that Detroit Medical Center is quite high bed occupancy, Hurley Medical Center. We have also Trinity, it looks like, and there may be a couple others in there that are exceptionally high levels of occupancy as well. So hopefully that's useful to you. That is a great resource, again, from the state of Michigan, michigan.gov/coronavirus, but we'll put the full link for statewide available PPE and bed tracking in the links page. So I hope you follow up on that. Also, I wanted to put out a call out for later in the show. We've got multiple inquiries for test labs, folks who have, for lack of a better word, bugs, that if somebody wants to either try killing those bugs or keeping those bugs out, that you guys have a commercial test lab that's able to do the bacteriological, sporicidal, virucidal testing for them. Please make yourself known. We do have folks who want to get in touch with you. And with that, that's our news for the day. I want to bring on our friends, Glenn Green and Scott Olson. You guys can unmute your mics and unmute your videos. With Make Medical, we were privileged to have Dr. Green and former Governor Snyder on the show last week, and we were hearing all about this really cool regulating vent splitter that you guys were working on. I was like, okay, we get it. We understand why. And then I heard like 2 days later, you guys got the EUA nod from FDA. So we're having you back to tell us all about it. I think we're starting with Dr. Green to hear a little bit, and then we're going to go over to Scott, who led the EUA charge.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here again, Gene, and to explain where things are at with vent splitter here. Oh boy, it's too shiny. But we have the vent splitter. We're ready to ship next week after we got the EUA. We are having one problem, and that's we have a number of one-way valves that are part of our system. With those one-way valves, we need, Teleflex has the number that we need, but can't go and give them directly to us due to some restriction. And so we're looking for a distributor that has an existing contract with Teleflex so we can get access to the one-way valves.
Okay, so a distributor that has contact with Teleflex already has some kind of distribution agreement with them. You'll, I hope, post that. I think we might have seen that in between ourselves, but please post that valve specification in the chat box after this is over, so that we can make sure to get that out to the group. I'm sure there's somebody out there who must have that kind of a thing. Great. I cut you off in the middle though, Dr. Green. Go on.
Okay. So when we work with the EUA, the things that I thought were interesting from my standpoint is they were very interested in the number of patients that would be helped, how quickly we could ramp up, but also things like how long it would take to teach the teams to use the device that we have. And so for us, it's very straightforward and doesn't require a lot of education. But for a new ventilator, that's a lot different than other ventilators, and that could be requiring quite a bit of time and not allow the ramp up. And they were also very interested in safety to the patients, but also safety to healthcare workers. So does this result in COVID being sprayed around the room that would affect other healthcare workers?
And maybe it's something Scott will touch on, but I'm interested, was that a long discussion or was that a pretty simple one in your case?
It's a fairly short one because it's something that we had thought about before. And so we were able to address the questions pretty quickly, and those were some of our main design considerations when we did this in the first place.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Green. And Scott, you were go ahead.
I just wanted to show what this looks like without the shininess, so you can see what this looks like.
There it is in all its glory.
Regulator. We're really proud of this.
Where's the component? It's probably buried inside, but where's the component that you're looking to get more of?
The one-way valve actually will go on the outside of this here
Gotcha. Very good.
as part of an assembly.
Great. Well, thank you for that update. And Scott, I recognize you couldn't be with us last week because you were down in the trenches getting this thing out. And I think it was over the weekend. I think we saw that FDA gave you guys the
Absolutely.
nod. So we'd love to hear about what you went through on your end making this thing come out.
Sure, and I'll fill in a few details and observations I thought were pretty interesting that might be of use to anybody else who's working on a ventilator accessory. But I think one of the fascinating pieces was the timeline. There certainly is urgency. We made that very clear to anyone who's going to listen, that we've got to get out because ventilators are running out. The wave is coming. We're a matter of days from it, not weeks or months. And the FDA really heard us. So I'm going to share my screen and put up a little table that shows the timing.
Yeah, we can see that. Great.
Okay. So down in the right, you can see that we had an introductory conversation that was facilitated by Ford Motor Company on Tuesday, April 7th. That was scheduled for 15 minutes. It was with the team lead of the respiratory group inside CDRH. He was immediately engaged, asked good questions, and it gave us 5 extra minutes. So 5:05, we were off to do the next thing, and that was it. So it was fascinating to have it introduced by Ford. They at the time, and I think they still do, have a standing meeting with the FDA on these types of issues. So Thursday before the 10th, so this would be the 9th, I let the gentleman that we spoke with know that we're going to be submitting on Friday. Not sure that we were going to be able to make that deadline. We set the deadline for 12. We made it just before 2. And 57 minutes later, we were contacted by the lead reviewer. It was just astonishing.
Wow.
He called Glenn up, had a good conversation, followed up with email, and we were scheduled before 5 o'clock for the following Monday. Now, given that they had only had it for a couple hours, that meant they were going to have to do some at least cursory review over the weekend, which they were willing to do. We met with them on Monday the 13th. It was a decent meeting. It was fairly high level. They had not had sufficient time, obviously, to dig into it deeply, but they gave us immediate feedback on it, put us back to work, asked for some additional things, and then scheduled the second meeting for Thursday later that week. They made a point of saying, let's make this interactive and really take that interactive concept seriously. So, actually even coining the term IRT, the Interactive Review Template, which had just come out either the Thursday or Friday before we started the discussions with them. As we were getting ready for it, we didn't even have that template available to us. We had to switch over and bring it all. We were basically following the letter that came out on March 24th. And then we switched over to the template, and it was in the format they were expecting. We did have multiple sort of individual calls. Interestingly, the team, and I'll talk about them a little bit, split up so that they could work in parallel. So most of them worked on the EUA content itself, and then we had a bunch of additional attachments to that elaborated on some of the content. And then the clinical person separated out the instructions for use and really focused on the clinical aspect of that. And then, of course, the lead went back and forth between the two. So by Sunday evening around 9 o'clock, we had the authorization in hand. Just an amazing process. On Friday, when I spoke with the lead reviewer, he started laughing at one point when he asked me, "Are you guys available on the weekend?" And I said, "Well, absolutely. If you guys are going to work, then we're going to be there with you." He says, he laughs and he says, "You're never going to have an interaction with FDA like this again." Okay, well, now we know you can do it. So I think the mark has been set. That's what we're going to expect that next time.
That's pretty impressive.
So I did have a few observations as I look back on that that I thought would be valuable to the group and anybody who's looking at pursuing the EUA for the vent accessories. First off, the team had partnered now there was this connection with Ford, which I think helped, because Ford certainly has credibility as a manufacturer, but it was clear right up at the beginning conversation, Ford was not there to manufacture these products. We had two ISO 13485 certified contract manufacturers, one for machining, which is the one that we wound up using, AutoCam, and then a second for injection molding if the volumes got high enough. And Dr. Green had mentioned that there was this uncertainty or area of interest in how many units were going to be needed. Well, that's the big unknown. The projections are the projections. We know how many vents there are and where they are, but what do we do with that knowledge, not knowing yet how many people are going to need the vents?
And that's a question the FDA has been asking all these vent companies is
Absolutely.
how many of these things can you produce? It's sort of been that's an issue. Okay.
Yep. Now on the process, their team consisted of 5. They had, and the team lead warned us of this. He says, I'm going to have 2 flow engineers available. They were really concerned about, and they're mechanical as well, but they're very concerned about what happens inside the vent. So we try to be ready for that, right inside the splitter. We had a biocompatibility expert to make sure that the materials don't cause any harm. And then a clinical expert, an MD, who was looking over the shoulders of the physicians on the team to make sure that the way it was being used, the way the instructions were being written, was appropriate from a clinical standpoint. As I mentioned, they referred to it as an interactive review template. And at one point, the lead reviewer said, let's make it our document, and asked for us to send him the Word document and so that the changes could be tracked. And so that was great. So there were times when they would insert words as if they were part of our internal review team. Other times they put on comments and said, flesh this out or add this or discuss this. So it was very much back and forth and very helpful. They had areas of feedback and concerns, and I think these are, I tried to make these sort of generic. Number one was the 2 primary areas, and we did do a hazard analysis for them, and we had talked to them about what systems we had in place, and the fact that we had 2 certified manufacturers lined up. But the 2 areas of big concern were reporting of any medical device reports from adverse events or product problems, and then design controls. And so those were the 2 that they brought up multiple times. We made sure that we addressed those. We made sure that we prioritized those in terms of fleshing out the company's quality management system, as well as tying it into control of subcontractors and the subcontractors' design control process. Interestingly, everything that they had reviewed up to that point, including the one product that they had approved, had been non-mechanical. So this was the first mechanical one, and they had very much significant concerns about that. The process of developing it and refining the design was to do 3D printing of it, and then to source components and MacGyver it together, of course. We were while we were talking to them, we had received, and this was probably 4 days before the approval, we had received the first few machined components, but we hadn't tested them yet. But we had tested the 3D printed up to 350,000 cycles, which was estimated to be the number of breath cycles that a patient on a vent would take. So there was rationale for why we did that. We had time by our final discussion with the team. We did have time to test it up to 50,000 cycles on the machine parts. Our plan, whether they wanted it or not, was to take it up to 500,000 because we wanted, if everything was terrible, you'd probably have 500,000 cycles if you had very rapid ventilation required by the patient. So with that in hand, and they knew that, they were concerned about, do the parts break? And we said, well, the important thing to understand is like a machined part out of aluminum is going to be more durable than a 3D printed part out of some type of polymer resin. Sure, that's true. However, they still wanted to see the proof in the pudding, so they wanted to make sure that the testing was done. On the IFU side, they pointed out a number of times that where they wanted additional cautions and warnings. I mean, it's a long list. They did bring up, and I thought this was interesting, they brought up a number of things which were very appropriate to the use of a ventilator in general, but also wanted to see it in the splitter. So that, there's both, what we talked about them as sort of the general ones, which are characteristic of dealing with vents, and then the two patient specific. When you're in the two patient mode is the way that we discussed it. What are the things that come up that are of special concern? And they wanted even additional ones to those. There was also a certification that we had to make. It was one of the sections, and it was having to do with items of conformance for ventilator
Declarations of conformance
manufacturers.
to the standards, yes. Yep.
Which we did all of that, and they wanted us to certify again during the process. Did you guys really look at these, or did you just create a nice little table saying does not apply, does not apply? Because only certain ones would apply for us. 60601, for example, because we're not an electrical device, doesn't really apply. So that was interesting, and that certification was important to them. So we went back through, double checked, make sure that we didn't overlook anything. We hadn't, and then so certified. And then it was interesting because there's been talk about proning patients who either on the ventilators or even prior, so that they don't need ventilators. And they wanted proning to be addressed. And so that was one of the final things. So I tossed that one over the medical transom to Dr. Green and had him come up with a very thoughtful, we talked about as troubleshooting. When you're going to be proning a patient who's already been put onto the vent, which you would want to do subsequent to that happening, subsequent to being placed on the vent, what are the special implications for the splitter device, and then how do you make sure that you're being tuned into those, and make it consistent with what other proning guidelines for clinical application would be. Those pick up some of the staffing, but then they also wanted to have warnings about staffing in general, basically to make sure that there's enough staff for the number of patients that you have. And we had heard this as a problem at a lot of different hospitals where people are on vents, but they're not being monitored. So if something goes awry or the patient deteriorates, they're not being observed in time, and you've got alarms going off everywhere. And then finally, the monitoring component. We spent a lot of time talking with them, explaining how the unique monitoring feature in our second circuit works, how it does not interfere with the monitors on the vent itself, how it works in conjunction with them, and then importantly, how you can manage the expiratory pressure of both patients, which is an extremely unique feature of the way this device was designed.
That's a great summary, Scott, all in one slide there too. I really, really appreciate that. And we've actually gone a little bit beyond what we had allotted, but I think this is really important because this is right in the heart and soul of what FDA, the oversight they're exercising. And you guys got in relatively short order here to get to go all the way through that, which is just phenomenal. I want to take just a minute, even though we're a little bit beyond here, I want to take just a minute and see if the audience has any questions. Feel free to raise your virtual hand. I see one from Peggy McLaughlin. Peggy, you are live with Dr. Green and Scott.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Scott, in regard to your FDA submission, were you required to submit actual test reports for any testing you did, or only to certify in regards to the appropriate standards?
What we wound up doing, we thought we'd be able to certify as to what we had done. We had to do whatever testing. We actually provided reports. They were probably not as formal and detailed as a typical submission for a 510K or a de novo or PMA, but where we tested, and we did 2 animal tests, we did multiple cycle tests, mechanical tests, and simulation tests. All of those data were put together in sort of a lightweight package and provided. Other areas, especially on biocompatibility, we just didn't have time, for example, to do things like, is there off-gassing from one of the polymeric components? So the way that we handled that was we said, well, here are the tests that have been done from the supplier. So we knew that there were certain characteristics of biocompatibility and the testing that had been done, and we said, we'll rely on that from the supplier, and then we asked the FDA in turn to rely on that from us. And kind of go back to that second to last bullet. The risk remains on medical, so as long as we were willing to certify that, they were willing to accept it.
So you didn't have to do the the breathing tube testing. I'm trying to think of the standard, the 1A.
Right. We didn't.
Is that the breathing gas pathway, Peggy, that you're thinking
Yes,
of?
yes.
Yep.
That's correct. We didn't have to do that. In lieu of it, what we showed was our performance testing, both in the simulation, and so this is with both circuits hooked up, and then the side-by-side, we were able to maintain both patients, or actually in our case, it was a balloon on one circuit, on the primary circuit, and then an animal on the second. And we were able to show the performance output as expected, as well as what was dialed into both the splitter and into the vent. And in fact, we did show that, and they accepted that.
Great, thank you.
Great question. Yeah, thank you, Peggy, for that question. Follow up there, Scott. Do you think that was because you guys went to the metal on the thing that they basically said we don't really have a lot of concerns about the biocomp of the breathing gas pathway?
That's a great question. I don't know all of the reasons. In fact, we did go back and ask them about compatibility. We wanted to make one change from what we originally submitted. They did a phenomenally responsive. They got back in a terrific amount of time and gave us the thumbs up to do that, where we were actually going to remove a coating, which, on the one hand, you could say, well, if you're removing a coating, that's probably less of a risk, but the coating was there for a particular reason, and other vent manufacturers had, and we even pointed to the K numbers on the other manufacturers, had done it with coated parts. So we knew there was some risk in going in with that, but they gave us the thumbs up there. I think because we had included the characterizations of the materials of the aluminum itself, and so they could see, well, what would it be like even without the coating on it.
That's great. Well, thank you guys for this so much. I think we're out of time here now, but that was a wonderful summary, Scott, and a wonderful update, Dr. Green. We really appreciate you guys coming on, and congratulations, because this is a wonderful, wonderful success story, and it's amazing to see so many people coming together to make it happen. Cool to see how Ford was involved to help get in the door there. And once again, congratulations, and keep letting us know what we can do. Just a reminder, the Make Medical team is looking for a particular one-way valve from Teleflex. So anybody who's got a purchasing contract with Teleflex could really be a lifesaver right now, and we will try to get you guys in touch with that. Oh, I've got one more quick one here. Let's see. David Sarman is Zorian, who I think we put in touch with Dave Gregorka. Does the manufacturer have to test the main part, non-destructive testing, as usual, or do they have limited testing to do under the EUA? I'm not maybe sure I follow the question entirely.
We tested the full assemblies as well as the components.
Okay, you did, yeah, full assembly testing. That's great. Well, guys, thank you again. Really appreciate it. We got to move on, but really appreciate you being here. And once again, congratulations.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Great. And next up, I want to welcome Jacob Luria, who is the CEO of Algorex Health. I was talking this week with Lauren, who works for Algorex, and some of the conversations that this company out of Boston is having and some of the things that they are doing is very interesting in light of where this whole thing is going, because now we're starting to look at these population dynamics, and we're all glued to what's happening with, the Johns Hopkins webpage or others. And I thought there was a really interesting thing that they're doing, and I want everyone to hear about it. Jacob, welcome to COVID Connect.
Great, thanks so much for having me. This will be a little bit of a different presentation than the prior. I think that we exist in the world of data and thinking about how to engage populations. So when we go from sort of the very detailed world of medical device and manufacturing and engineering activities, we're going to take a step up here and talk about some ways that largely health plans, but a combination of health plans and health providers have been able to utilize consumer marketing data, the way that we're all sold toothpaste and toilet paper and other sort of consumer goods from a direct consumer marketing perspective, to learn more about populations and try to understand and stay ahead of who may be at risk based on not necessarily some of the clinical activities for COVID-19, but some of the economic factors, and making sure that some of the vulnerable patients in Medicaid and Affordable Care Act or Obamacare health plans are being cared for before they self-report and say, I really need help, so that we can be proactive, predictive with resource allocation. So to take the 10,000-foot view, Algorex Health, we're based out of Boston. We are a data science as a service firm. Our clients ask us questions about who should we spend time with. We focus on non-clinical interventions that are largely called the social determinants of health, things like transportation support, nutrition and grocery delivery, housing stability, care for homeless individuals, social isolation, and maintaining coverage through what are difficult times. And so if you think about these things, we know that these are incredibly important for the overall health of residents, especially when we think about some of the lower income health plans around Medicaid and ACA exchange activities. And we know health plans are becoming more progressive, and health systems as well, about investing and deploying services. But no matter how progressive a health plan or health system is, there's never enough money to pay for groceries for all of their members. Right? There's never enough money to think about how do I provide rides for every single one of my members. So we need to think about how can I use what consumer marketers do, which is take very, very large populations and whittle them down into sets of cohorts so that I can figure out who should I offer what service to, and how do I align some of the things that I can do to have the biggest impact. Right? So again, this is going into the data world, right? This isn't a physical thing, totally different conversation than the prior one. And the work that we do is looking at residents.
And I just want to say that's an important thing, Jacob, because I think what we're all doing now is we're starting to see these curves and everything's kind of moving around, and we're all going,
absolutely.
But what does it actually mean, and what should we be doing next? And we're sort of in that middle ground where it's not quite the crisis it was, but it's not quite the crisis it could be. So this is why we're having this conversation.
Absolutely. And I think that the what should I be doing now is where we're spending the majority of our time. I think we all know that the health systems are laser focused on the clinical surge, right? Taking care of the patients that present. But health plans are having really interesting conversations about how can I help? What should I be doing right now? How can I help fewer people show up in the emergency room? How can I help understand my membership, and what can I use my resources for while all the clinical supply is being utilized with the COVID surge activities, right? So we're working with 2 health plans in the state of Michigan to segment populations to understand, right, out of those members, these are stats nationally right here around elder Americans who are at greater risk. Elder Americans who live alone are at even greater risk and probably need support. A subset of this is elder Americans living alone with no car. Right, that's a group that needs a lot of help, especially with food delivery and grocery services. Then we also look at members who might be switching their health plan. Right, if you're going from a commercial plan through your employer to a Medicaid plan based on income requirements, that's a new health plan for you. That's a whole new set of navigation, and being able to be proactive and say, we now have you as a member of our plan. What can we do to support you during this time so that you do not end up in the emergency department, so that you get attached to a primary care provider who has greater virtual ability? I think that the macro trend here is avoiding an ER visit for a non-COVID set of activities is worth its weight in gold. And so what can we do from the health plan perspective to try to engage these members, provide them services so they don't show up with an adverse clinical event? And then the last area is looking at members whose employment segment is in arts, hospitality, and food service activities, who might have greater negative impact, especially to income, wealth, and assets due to just the economic shutdown. Right, so this is at a high level. When we actually take it a little bit deeper, and we'll share this handout, I believe the link is in the chat. If not, Lauren and I will make sure it is. We can start to map out specific geographies. So this is the area of Houston. Right, we've aggregated the COVID tracker data set, some of the IHME models, put in some ways of doing some modeling here to say, what do we think is going to happen? right? Much of this information is not different than some of the New York Times tracking. It just creates a different set of an interactive way to play with it for health plans and health systems to understand their regions. But most importantly, as we look at it, is what's going to happen to this population from Medicaid, new uninsured, so that we can understand what type of capacity do we need to be building, what kind of outreach services can we be providing, so that members that might slip through the crack under traditional times are not slipping through the crack. Because if someone who has a chronic condition slips through the crack today, they're now a big burden on the emergency department of these health systems that really do not have spare capacity to offer greater services when those could be potentially avoided. Right, so with that, would love to sort of answer any questions, but wanted to sort of make this known that this work is happening in the state of Michigan. This is work that we are learning as much as we're delivering right now in terms of what could be helpful, and also trying to understand what are some of the last mile fulfillments. So if we identify someone who is socially isolated, what should we do? Right, there's a number of services that we've worked with health plans to align video chats, in some cases help them with technology setup so they can be more connected with their family members. But we talk a lot that anyone who has some of these interventions or experience with these as a friend, our core competency is in the identification of these members before they self-report needs. So with that, I'll pause and take any questions the group may have.
Thank you for that summary, Jacob. I appreciate that. And this is like I said, it's a really important topic as we're getting to that back into the prediction world again. And I think it's a very important thing. Raise your hand if you have a question for Jacob. I do see one hand raised. Ken Spencer from U of M MCirc. Ken, you are live.
Yes, thank you, Jacob. This is really fascinating, so I appreciate it very much. Kind of have an additional question. There's so much discussion right now about testing and how many people should be tested and things. But do you help in that regard in terms of which segments should be targeted to test, and how much of that segment should be targeted to actually have a validated, estimate here on whether we're testing enough or not?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in terms of testing, are we testing enough or not? I think I can say without any of our data science team going to work, the answer is no. And when we think about sort of what that actual number is, we've replicated some of the work that has been done largely from the state of New York Health Department around serology testing. And how they've looked at some areas around creating random samples that are statistically significant. But the best way to look at some of that activity is when we can get to a positivity rate that is much lower than 10%. As long as there's a positivity rate of greater than 10%, the answer is we're not doing enough testing. And can spend probably another 3 hours going on that topic, but it's probably best as a follow-up than eating up the rest of the agenda today.
Great question, Ken. Great answer, Jacob. Appreciate that. Any other questions for Jacob while we have him here? While we're waiting to see, I mean, this is great. We would love to stay in touch, Jacob. And obviously, feel free to tune into the webinar. We could always make you live if there's new stuff to talk about. And as the conversation continues, we'd love to have you, continue the conversation with us. We really appreciate you coming on today. I don't see any other comments, but I want to thank you again for your time.
Thank you very much.
That was great. Speaking of serologic testing, I am going to reach out here to make our friend Stephen Goldner from RAA live. Stephen, I just got to make you live here 1 second. All right, Steve, you should be in a position where you can share your screen and share your video.
So am I unmuted now?
You are unmuted. We can hear you just fine. It's good to hear your voice.
It's good to hear also yours. I'm not sure how to share the screen, or at least the video.
There should be a video button down to the bottom of the
there
Zoom
it is.
controls. There you are.
There we are. Yes. So it's terrific to meet so many of my colleagues. Hi, Scott, everyone else, as well as Eugene, for doing this. And yes, we're safely isolated here because I've been alive for 72 years and I intend to stay that way.
Excellent. Very good. Well, I appreciate your being with us today, Steve. You had mentioned to me that you guys are right in the middle of a COVID-19
Right.
serologic test EUA that you're working through, and obviously can't share the proprietary details, but we'd love to hear just a minute or two from you on what you're seeing. Mike Tomasevich has been with us on some other calls, and he's alluded to some things that you guys have seen, but I'd love to hear from you. What are the big issues that you're having to present to FDA? What are the things that they're asking? Where are the gotchas? Like when Scott alluded to, there's this template that some of us are finding out as we pursue the ventilator. It's like, wait, you never told us that up front. So what are you seeing?
Yeah. So for the serologic test, first off, what we've put in for, we've not yet heard back from FDA. So for the timeline, we're a regulatory consulting company. We've done 250 510Ks successfully. So we have a pretty good track record of knowing exactly what needs to be done here. We picked up this client last Monday, worked day and night, put in the data to FDA on Friday. FDA acknowledged that they'd received it within about 25 minutes. And 2 business days later, which was the Tuesday afterwards, they came back essentially saying, gee guys, we know you want an answer real soon and we are working so hard. And to our somewhat discouragement, it's now 3 days later and we are still chasing after them, but that's the way this often goes. Yeah, there is for serologic tests. We put in for one that's a lateral flow. This is to measure IgM, IgG in serum, plasma, or whole blood. It could be used as point of care. It could be used as a home kit even. It's technology from Canada, and we'll be bringing it here into the States. So in terms of putting the information together, I could say overall, if you've ever done a 510K, this is less than 10% of the effort to be able to do that. FDA is trying to be very responsive, but as many of you have heard on the news, there's somewhere between 70 and 90 applicants for test kits, and FDA was burned very badly by some of the kits going out with more than 70% false negatives or false positives, and FDA now is taking a real look at that again. Substantively, what we needed to go through was a lot of what I would call standard label and labeling, the indications for use, the instructions for use, fact sheets, and then to give descriptions of clinical data. In our case, we had 48 patients for positivity testing, 43 for negativity testing, all data that had been gathered in China back in February and March of just several months ago. So we actually have real in-clinic use and data to report to. We needed to give a CMC quick reference sheet, as well as a couple of very, very simple forms to fill out. So overall, the process has been exceptionally simple to get in. There is a particular format for reporting positive versus negative data and how to count that, and you do need to get that right. And beyond that, we're now in the process of putting in a couple more applications. One happens to be for a device that is a spray-on or a liquid application to hard or soft contact surfaces like bedsides, floors, walls, or personal protective equipment, clothing that could be worn that is antiviral, antimicrobial, and seems to have good substantive value as a fairly effective, not quite instantaneous COVID killer. And that's based on technology from a 510K we put in almost 15 years ago that we're now repurposing. So that's a little bit of the summary for it so far.
That's very
questions.
cool. No, we appreciate that very much. Well, let's pop over there and see if any of our attendees have any questions. And raise your hand if you got a question for Steve, especially about the serological test kit. Jennifer, you are live if you unmute.
Hello?
We can hear you.
Oh, hi. Steve, this is, my name's Jennifer Rader Devens. I have a background in infection prevention from 3M, back to Dickinson, places like that. And I've worked on topical antiseptics. I did not work in the diagnostic division at BD. So I appreciate everything you're doing, but have not been as close to it as you, obviously. Your comment that I was interested in was around personal protective equipment and antimicrobial, antiviral, I guess PPE for the healthcare workers administering the test and or maybe the patients. What are you hearing in that area?
Well, so far, FDA, we have a number of products that we have brought in from overseas to be distributed here in the United States. And the process for doing that with FDA and coordinating through their import office is stunningly simple, but every time we need to make sure that it's coming in. I'm not sure if that's what you're asking. That's supply chain kind of question.
Was Jennifer's question more? I think what I heard you say, Steve, was that you're working on a surface sanitizer,
yes.
basically. And I think maybe what Jennifer was pointing out was when it comes to the gowns and the face masks and everything else, FDA has told us all, don't talk about antimicrobial, antiviral. But what I understood you to say was, this isn't about a face mask sanitizer. This is about surfaces, the disinfectant, which is under FDA's other EUA and other guidance, but it's separate, just to be clear for everybody. We're not talking about sanitizing. I think from what you said, soft surfaces and filters, we're talking about sanitizing other hospital surfaces. Is that correct?
That's correct. So for that part of it, Jennifer, the data was submitted to FDA 10, 15 years ago. And so that's frankly lain dormant within the agency because the product was not actually developed. So now it is about to be developed, and it's a liquid application, spray on or liquid that dries and does have antimicrobial, antiviral capabilities that have already been demonstrated to FDA. Is that the answer?
Well, there's lots of different ways to take this. I thought I was listening 100%, and then all of a sudden I wasn't sure where I was tracking with you. So you're making two different comments. One is about the PPE that a healthcare worker should wear when they're sampling, and then separately, maybe what I missed was a transition to cleaning, whether it's from Nice Pack or where have you, Ecolab, for sanitizing surfaces in the office, for instance.
Yeah, so that's not an aspect that we've gotten involved with yet to be able to do that. So I'm sorry that I can't comment on that. All I could comment on is what we actually have experience with as we pull together the data in order to be able to have products that just as easily could be sprayed into the cabin of a car or an ambulance to be able to make those surfaces antiviral.
Yeah,
sure.
great.
Okay. And then there's people like Patel who are publishing ways that they can clean respirators if you'll mail them back to them.
Yeah,
right.
That's great.
Okay.
Thank you, Jennifer, for that. Appreciate that. And I think that brings up an important point that I think everyone's still trying to figure out, but it's pretty clear from FDA's perspective, like we've talked about before. Those face masks, if you're cleaning those, that's a EUA for your company that you've got to go get. But what we're talking about here is a disinfectant for surfaces, and that's another cool thing that FDA has their eyes on as well. So,
right.
Steve, I really appreciate you being here today and for sharing
My
that
pleasure.
with us. As you hear more, we'd love to have you back and catch us up on all the little tidbits that come out of FDA, because it's like I was thinking when Scott was talking, we're seeing this EUA process, and many of us have seen the breakthrough device pathway. And this is almost like the breakthrough device pathway on steroids. It's like FDA just wants to, come out and talk if they're not swamped, which is apparently this week they've all been swamped. So
Great. Thanks
for
so
being here,
much,
Steve.
Gene. We'll
Appreciate
hang out.
it. Great. Well, let's see. We're going to go next. I'm going to share our presentation here once more again, just we can keep track of where we are. Where we are is we want to talk about the latest EUA that FDA came out with. But before that, I want to tell you really briefly, there are now 45, I think Steve just alluded to this. He said something like 70 companies in the pipeline for test kits. This week, there are 45 now authorized test kit manufacturers and commercial laboratories. There are 18 high complexity tests. That's up from 39 and 16 last week when we had this webinar. So those continue to go up, and there's quite a pipeline there. But as he said, the FDA got burned quite a bit on some of the accuracy. I want to read you really quickly the decontamination list that is now approved for emergency decontamination of personal protective equipment, specifically of the N95 respirators. As we mentioned before, this is not something you want to just go out and stick Lysol in a box, or for that matter, please don't inject it into yourself. This is not legal advice. It's just not a good idea. But they don't go out there and stick Lysol in a box or UV in a box and just go out and say, I clean masks, because that's what FDA is holding these mask decontamination EUAs for. And if I've got my screen shared correctly, I hope I do. Someone will let me know if I don't. We'll see some of the latest here. The latest is for Sterilucent Inc. They have a sterilization system that's been approved or authorized. Stryker's Sterizone has a decontamination cycle that has been authorized. And then we're getting back into things we've talked about already, but just to remind you, Sterad has one, Steris has one, as well as the original Battelle system, the first one that achieved FDA's emergency use authorization for N95 decontamination. Got to remind people, the whole point of this is that N95 is a certification standard. We're saying that it filters out 95% of particles a given size or greater. That's got to be held to. That's got to be certified and tested. And when they're cleaned, which they were never meant to be cleaned in the first place, there has to be some assurance that they're still doing what they were supposed to, and that it actually kills the viruses and other things on those masks. So please, please, please make sure that you're working with FDA on those kinds of applications. Finally, give you some highlights of Appendix B on the ventilator list. If we scroll down here really quick, we're going to see our friends Make Medical and the VentMI on the list, as well as Prisma Health. We had Marjorie on the show a few weeks ago. And so those two and the Vent Multiplexer are the three splitters that are out there now available for use, as well as since the last meeting that we had, 3B Medical has the Luna G3, which is a BiPAP machine. There's also an iBreeze positive air pressure machine from ResVent. And the Virgin Orbit, which I think we heard about at some point in the past, has finally made it out. And it's an emergency use resuscitator. So those are some new things on the ventilator side that have made it to Appendix B since we last met. As a reminder, Appendix B is the place you've got to get if you want to sell and distribute a ventilator accessory, or a ventilator splitter under the emergency use authorization. And with that, I want to take you really quickly to the latest emergency use authorization for masks. And this is a, maybe not a lot of surprises here, but I think even more clarity than FDA had given us previously. And so March 18th, this is the day after our last meeting that we all had together, FDA has reiterated some things about basic face masks. Again, we are talking about face masks, surgical masks, and N95s. Those are usually the three categories that end up in our discussion. And when it comes to N95s, we understand that they have to be certified. They have to either be certified by NIOSH, or they have to be certified by some other respected international standards or national organization. When it comes to surgical masks, we recognize that they have to provide liquid ingress protection to a recognized test level. And they have to provide flammability protection because they're being used in anesthetic gas environments that are flammable. Those two really have a lot of requirements still around them, even though many of the requirements have been waived. When it comes to basic face masks, this is where FDA is trying to give a lot of clarity and get a lot of masks out there. As we even learned today with Michigan's latest stay-at-home order revision, the governor's telling us wear basic non-medical masks, wear a bandana, wear something to stop the spray from your mouth from coming out into the local environment. And so when we get down to these basic masks, yet in this case, intended and sold to be used in this COVID-19 crisis, they have to follow the following requirements. It's not rocket science, but there are a couple little hidden points that we want to cover today. First, product is labeled accurately to describe it as a face mask. This, I think, was the question that was being asked just a little while ago, I believe by Jennifer, which is no antiviral claims, no virucidal claims, don't include any drugs or biologics in your mask, don't tell people it's anything special for killing COVID. It's just a face mask. And you need to include a list of body contacting materials, at least tell people what they're putting up against their skin. It needs to not make a claim as a surgical mask or that it provides a liquid barrier protection. And you should make any recommendations that you can to reduce the risk of such use. And there's some examples here. You might say it's not for use in a surgical setting. That would be a good limitation. Or it's only for use in a clinical setting where the infection risk level isn't very high. Or don't use it around a high intensity heat source. So those are some things that you can put on the labeling to make it clear you're not making the surgical or the filtration claims. Don't misrepresent the intended use. Again, don't make antimicrobial or antiviral claims, and don't claim a particular level of particulate filtration. Now, scrolling down, many parts of FDA's oversight have been waived during the public health crisis, but you still have to do the following if you're going to be a manufacturer or a distributor of these products. You've got to make them available with labeling that includes a description of the product as a face mask, including a list of the body contacting materials. We saw that a moment ago. You have to not label it as any of the things you shouldn't be labeling it as, listed here. We talked about that. You have to make the labeling available to each end user or end user facility, like a hospital, either in hard copy or electronic format. So you could have a tag on the box or on the product that points you to a website that has the appropriate labeling. Either one is fine, but throwing a label on the box isn't too hard to do. Manufacturers and distributors have to include instructions for cleaning and disinfection, but I'm guessing that most of you that are thinking about basic face masks aren't thinking about cleaning and disinfection. So make sure you say that it's not for reuse, it's only for single use. The standard symbol for that is a number 2 with a circle and a line through it. Manufacturers will have a process in place for reporting adverse events. This is something that I think a lot of people don't realize. You've got to have a system in place, and you can read more about it at this link. Give us a call, happy to talk about it. You need to be able to report to FDA if anything goes wrong with your product. So you need a way to get some basic level of complaints back and some way to report it to FDA and a process for doing so. You also have to maintain the records associated with this until otherwise notified by FDA. So this is pretty much an indefinite hold on to those records until FDA tells you you can let go of them. And they could come and ask you for those records, so please do hold on to those. Through inventory control, you need to maintain records of the entities to which they distribute face masks. Remember, FDA is waiving all sorts of things like unique device identification and other lot tracking things that would normally be required. So they're asking at a very basic level, make sure that you maintain a list of who you've distributed them to and the numbers distributed to those folks. When it comes to advertising, keep in mind that you don't want to make claims that are out of line with what we've just gone through. You also have to make it clear that the product has not been FDA cleared or approved. It's simply been authorized by the EUA, by the FDA under an EUA for healthcare providers as personal protective equipment to help prevent the spread of infection. And it's only good for the duration of the declaration. So as long as we've got a public health emergency, this is fine. But afterwards, this EUA is going to go away. So keep that in mind as you're thinking about stock levels. Think about that labeling, think about those adverse events, and think about how to judge when this whole thing may go away. I think that link from the state of Michigan could really help people to sort of gauge how much PPE do hospitals have, what should we be targeting, where should we be going, and hopefully that'll be useful to you as you think about this. We're gonna to answer any questions you may have about the EUA or any other EUA that we've talked about previously. If you have a question, please feel free to raise your hand. We'll do our best to answer it. There may be some questions in the Q&A box as well. We'll give just a minute to see if we have any Q&A that comes through either for the current EUA or any of the other EUAs that we've talked about on the show. Feel free to raise your virtual hand. While we're waiting for that, anything from our team? I forgot to mention at the outset, I'm joined by Aaron Kerr, Rick Routs, and Adrian Harris, and Steve Minus from our team, who have been my stalwart support crew during all of this, fielding things on the back end, contributing, and generally making this work. So I thank them all for their hard work. Do you guys see any other questions that we should be answering at the moment? If not, we'll go to the open forum.
There's a question about the UV light decontamination in the chat.
Let's see, in the chat. Question is, what about UV light decontamination? This from Lisa Balance. Lisa, I don't know if you are in a position to raise your hand and if you can clarify the question that you have, but we'd be happy to answer in a little more detail. There's Lisa. I'm going to allow you to talk. Lisa, you can just unmute yourself and we'll look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. So my question is about using UV light, high intensity UV light, to decontaminate and then reuse N95s. Is this something, and pardon my ignorance, that the FDA has to look at? Should there be special disclosures for the healthcare providers that are now using these reused masks?
Great question, Lisa. Yes, great. Thanks for bringing that up. So the short answer is yes. Now, there's two ways your question could have gone. One is UV decontamination of rooms, which FDA has guidance on. And but as far as the masks go, and so they've got oversight of both. But as far as the masks go, every individual company that wants to market a decontamination system for N95 masks needs to submit for their own EUA, because methods are different, dosages are different, systems are different, capacities are different. They can't issue a blanket EUA, excuse me, for mask decontamination. So Battelle was the first one to get one of those, and now Steris and Sterid and others have them for their systems. And what's generally required in that, there is a guidance. I'll actually see if I can bring it up real quickly here, and if not, we can point you to it after the show. Which talks about the type of information you want to go to FDA with when you're approaching them for a sterilization, a mask sterilization system. Let me just find that one. And I have to make a disclaimer as I'm showing you this one. I cannot promise you that this is the latest version of it. So I believe it has not changed in this aspect, but we're going to double check that we've got the latest one here, and we'll make sure you get that one. But FDA is responsible for the oversight of reprocessed single-use medical devices and generally requires the submission of a 510K. If you're thinking about reprocessing, so this could be UV, this could be hydrogen peroxide, vapor sterilization. This could be any number of things. The things they would like to see coming from you: a description of the process for the disinfection, critical cycle parameters, information on chemical indicators and biological indicators. So in other words, if you're going to run this load, how do you know that you killed stuff after it. So they're asking for info on CI and BI, validation of bioburden reduction and disinfection. They give some recommendations for the log reductions that you'd like to see. I think this is a critical one. Evidence to demonstrate that soils are either removed or do not interfere with the bioburden reduction disinfection process. So if you've got a big spot of blood that's caked up on a mask and there's virus hanging out underneath that, and the UV hits the surface but doesn't do anything underneath, what's going to happen? And how do we deal with that? Do we have to tell them that that mask is done for and we're not going to sterilize it or reprocess it? Or can we prove that it's actually killing stuff underneath? That's going to be a question you have to wrestle with if you're thinking about UV decontamination. Protocols and acceptance criteria, description of chain of custody. I think this was part of your question. Do we have to tell people that this has been used? And in fact, they want to see what your plan is for the chain of custody and the safety considerations for each step. So do people have to be clothed in PPE when they're reprocessing these? Does it have to be done under BSL-2 or BSL-3? And then this one's great. Describe how the respirators will be handled to ensure that they're not contaminated or mixed with masks to be disinfected. So you've got to keep them separated and show how your plan for the disinfection process is going to make sure that doesn't happen. I believe there is somewhere in here identification. This part is about material compatibility and how many times it can be reprocessed. Many companies have just said, we're going to put a Sharpie mark on it. Others have said it's got to go back to the same user. I don't know if that's universal, but I think that's a common one. And I think number 7 gets down to one of the specific questions you asked. A copy of the reprocessed device labeling, which FDA recommends, should clearly state the mask is reprocessed, identify how many times it may be reprocessed, advise the users to discard it when it's visibly damaged, and identify the materials that are incompatible with the reprocessing cycle. So that's the stuff that you should be going to FDA with. They ironically, I shouldn't say ironically, they interestingly don't say you have to have every last bit of this before you come talk to us, but they do say answer as much of this as you can when you approach us about an EUA for your mask decontamination system, and that would include UV decontamination systems. Did that answer your question, Lisa?
Can you still hear me?
Yep.
Yes, sorry. It did, but let me just ask this. What if you're a small medical center and you are planning to do this internally only and not to distribute?
That's a great question. I have to say I don't know the answer to that one, except to say that we are seeing, if you look at the Steris and the Sterad ones, I believe it's the Steris system especially that's in common use at many medical centers. And Steris didn't just say, go off and do this. They said, okay, we're gonna get the cycle cleared with FDA. We're gonna get an EUA for the cycle in the equipment that you probably already have on site. So we're seeing a lot of folks go through that. I certainly wouldn't feel very comfortable to see somebody distributing a system. I couldn't really advise you on your own hospital system doing something internal to itself. It's outside of the, probably outside of the EUA. But certainly if there's any sense of distribution, you would want to go through the EUA.
So I think that's a really good point, because we have affiliated hospitals that are not legally connected to ours, but provide clinical services. And that's where I was seeing that maybe the distribution could be considered. So great advice. Thank you. And
again, not legal advice. And you found a really interesting question that I think is really critical for, I'm sure, what you guys are looking at. But yeah, hope the first part of that helps. And I'm interested to know how the second part of your question works out. Thanks for asking that.
Thank you. And I also asked if you would share the link, please.
Yes. Erin, can we make sure we have the latest version of the enforcement policy for face masks and respirators up on the links page and also on the chat?
Yes, I'll make sure those are all up there, and I'll post the link in the chat as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Erin. Thank you, Lisa. Appreciate your call in there. Thanks again for that. Great. Any other questions? We're about to go to open forum and let people have a chance to talk. Tell us about your updates, about your needs and everything else. But I see Ken Spencer's hand up. So Ken, I believe you are unmuted and live with us.
Hey, can you hear me now, Gene?
We can hear you.
Okay, so I wish I would have asked this follow-up question to Jacob earlier, because I'm really fascinated by the segment analysis that he had done there.
Yes.
But follow-up question on the testing is that we hear various things. Oh, we need to test 20% or 30% of the population or something like that, because we can't test 100% of the population. But I'm really wondering if his analysis could direct that testing to specific segments and prioritize them over others. For instance, would you be better off testing the people who are vulnerable, like us older people, or would you be better off testing the people who interact with a lot of people, like waitresses, waiters, and services and stuff like that, right? That deliver that thing. Because I can't imagine that you could just have a blanket, we need 30%. I mean, some segments need to be tested more than others. And I'm wondering if his analysis approach could be used to determine that.
That's a really interesting question. Yeah, should you be testing the most vulnerable, or should you be focusing the testing on the highest vectors? I'm sure there's a term for that. The folks who have the most contact points with everybody else. It's a great question. If anyone has a thought on that, feel free to raise your hand and continue that discussion with Ken and I. That would be great. Any of our biologists or social health friends, we'd welcome your thoughts. And we'd also welcome the open forum time that we always have. I'm going to bring our presentation back up here one more time. My team can let me know if that is showing up. We should be seeing the community open forum page, and we're going to take about 30 seconds each. You can have a little more time today. We've got about 10 minutes available here. We want to hear what your name is, who you work for, what you need, and what you're offering. We'd love to hear from conveners, large groups making connections. We'd love to hear from hospital systems as a status check. Let us know if the numbers that you just saw on the Michigan page are correct. We'd love to know that. Material suppliers. I want to make a call out also. There's a gentleman by the name of Eric on this call who is looking for melt-blown suppliers. And we had a few folks, I know John Nanos and Jerry Douglas were part of the discussion of melt-blown materials. If you can make yourselves known to Eric, I know he's looking for Eric Yang, he's looking for that. As well as manufacturers. If you are manufacturing PPE, if you're manufacturing ventilators, or if you want to be involved and you have things to offer, we want to hear from you. As well as on the diagnostics side, diagnostics is going to become a big focus in these coming weeks. And as you can see from that influx of folks doing EUAs for the diagnostics. So we'd love to hear from all of you. And I'm going to bring this slide down for a second. And we're going to go to our attendees and we're going to see, does anyone feel free to raise your hand if you are from any of those groups that I listed, and we would love to hear from you. Or if you have an idea that you don't think has been heard and you want to bring it up. Looks like everybody's talked out this week. Must be great weekend coming up. I see a couple coming up here. I have got, oh, they're coming out of the woodwork. My good friend Philip Ola, just unmute and you are on with us. Welcome.
Hello, hi Gene. Thanks for the great webinar. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks for being here.
So I have it's a question around the serology testing. So one of the things that we're looking to explore is the creation of a biobank for COVID-19 blood, which is very specifically assigned to testing for antibody tests. Yeah. So we're looking for recovered patients that have had COVID-19, And one of the big problems at the moment with these serology testing is just there's just not been enough testing performed, because there's not been enough blood available. So one thing that we want to do as we move forward with the antibody testing is to create a bank of blood that we can make available to do testing on these new tests as they're developed. So at the moment there is some plasma banking going on, but it's really for therapeutic. And what we want to do is to explore if there's any partners in the Windsor, Detroit, or Ann Arbor area that is interested in collaborating on this initiative.
That is a great question. I mean, we heard earlier how there's just this basic need for, I've got a device and I need to know if it works on these things. And when you go to the diagnostic side, you've got to have samples and you got to have diverse samples to be able to work from. That's phenomenal, Philip. Please make sure your information is in the chat box. Excuse me. We will make sure that gets incorporated into the contact list. And while we're on the call here, folks, if you heard Philip's call for blood banking as these serological tests are developed and want to collaborate, we can make sure that message gets spread widely. I know we've got folks from both health systems and research institutions who might be in a position to take you up on that, Philip. So any other tidbits you want to share with us? Oops, he's already on mute.
Oh, sorry. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Now, so tidbits. I think one of the big things that both Canada and a lot of the countries, Germany, UK, are doing is really looking at the prevalence of antibodies for COVID-19. And I think it's an important component. I don't think it's the only component to getting everyone back to work. But I think it's a really important component that I think any organizational strategy or any community should really think about doing. It doesn't have to be on a national scale. We're working in Canada with a large group of employees, and they want to come up with a model to test what percentage of their populations are antibody positive. So it can be done on any level. We also have supporting technology that goes along with this antibody testing that will help with certain things. So I just think it's something that we're going to see a lot more of, and it's definitely an area that is open for a lot of collaboration.
That's great, Philip. I appreciate you bringing that up, and let's keep tabs on this. And then if we can see something like that move forward, let's make sure we connect in a future week and we can update folks on that, because I think that's a great call to action. Thanks for that. Next up, Valerie Obenchain with AIRS. Valerie, good to hear you. If you unmute, we can hear you. There you are.
Hi guys, thank you so much for doing this webinar and for all your support for our device, the oxygen flow monitor. And we're still working hard to launch that device. We feel like the SpO2 features have a really big impact on what we're working on right now. So if anybody's interested, they can check us out on oxygenalarms.com is our website, and take a look at the devices that we're trying to bring out to help with the COVID. What I did want to let you know is I was recently introduced to a large supplier who has all types of personal protection equipment, N95 masks, gowns, gloves, just about anything that we could need. She's actually filling orders for FEMA. So she's a large player. So if anybody needs her contact information, I can make an introduction.
That's great, Valerie. Obviously we've got your info, but put your whatever email address you want or phone number or anything else right in the chat box, and then it'll go straight to this whole group, as well as all the previous listeners of the webinar. And if they do a search for some key terms in there, like PPE supplier, they'll be able to find it right based on what you type in.
Will do.
Thanks, Valerie. Appreciate that. Good to hear your voice.
Yeah.
Great. We're looking for any other check-ins from our healthcare friends, from our manufacturing friends, from our material supplier friends, from anybody out in the diagnostics space, especially anyone who could talk to Philip's, I think, important question of biobanking of COVID blood. That would be a really important thing. We'll take another minute to hear if there's anybody else with a question. I see Lisa Balance, you're back.
Hi, so I actually am with Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia.
Great.
So we are doing our own biobanking. I know that across all of the clinical and translational research centers that are NIH supported, that there's a huge initiative to do this biobanking of antibody positive blood. And I think I put that NIH is leading this initiative. So I would suggest that anyone who is looking to access this blood start there, or with your academic partners. We are seeing a lot of these patients, and we're doing as much biobanking as we can. Here's the issue. We can't, unless you have I think it's BSL 2 or 3 certified facility, we can't really work in this space. So partnering with somebody who can do the work in this space makes a lot of sense for institutions like ours.
And by the way, Philip, I put you back in talk mode there. So you're welcome to join this conversation. We can have this live. I think it's a great conversation.
Yeah.
Lisa, what you're saying is there's an initiative to do blood banking, but we don't have the facilities necessarily at the places that might have blood banked to be able to do the BSL 2-3 work that needs to be done. Is that correct, roughly?
Right. So we have a lot of investigators who want to work in this space. We're looking at partnering with another academic medical center that does have a facility. But I think that we're one of many academic institutions that don't have the proper laboratory space, or guess what? Our one BSL-2 lab is actually busy with other stuff. So we need to be able to partner with somebody who can utilize this blood, because we certainly cannot right now. We are working with the Red Cross because we want to do some convalescent plasma studies, but that's sort of a different thing.
Yeah. So Lisa, I was just going to kind of emphasize that. So there's two types of studies. So the convalescence study would actually work for the serological testing. If you're looking for the blood of patients that are still virus positive, then that's a whole new level 2, level 3, and you have to clean it, but that's a whole new thing. And I think we've probably going to stay away from that aspect. And we're really just looking at the recovered blood. So the Red Cross initiative would actually work for what we're trying to do. So just to kind of emphasize what that is. So the Red Cross, you have to have a certificate that says you are positive. And then you also have to have a certificate that says you are negative. And then they will take your plasma via the normal route. They don't test the plasma, and they then make that plasma available to research centers that are doing research on therapeutic. So again, that's still not for diagnostic mechanism. It's really just for to treat people, for clinical trials that are treating people who are sick with people that have antibodies.
Right. Okay.
That's good. So there's sort of two categories we're talking about here. One is just getting the blood back. The other is doing other types of work with COVID positive blood, I think is what I heard then separately.
Yes. Okay. So what we're looking for locally is being able to bank blood from patients that were COVID positive but are now COVID negative, and that blood can still be very useful for serological test optimization.
That's great. So I think maybe to summarize that for everybody, what we're looking for, and if somebody's listening to this afterwards and listening to the recording, we're looking for people who want to collaborate, research institutions that want to collaborate on formerly positive, now negative blood that would have the antibodies. And we're also asking, are there any BSL-3 labs that would be willing to collaborate with researchers who want to work on still positive COVID blood? I hope I got that right. You can both concur.
You did, absolutely. No, that's fine. Spot on, Gene, spot on.
That's great. Well, Lisa and Philip, I really appreciate your having that little mini conference right there. That was really, really informative. I'm going to take one more ask for any other, either contributing to this conversation or to just letting us know your needs and efforts that you're doing. If you haven't done it before, I hope you're all seeing the weekly emails. The last one, I'm sorry, this week we had a technical difficulty, but you should see the email from this episode come Monday. And if you follow those links, you will find the recording of it. You will find the contact list. You will find the chat box as well. So you can go back and see the chat box that happened and go back through it for your, if you didn't take enough notes today. I'll open it up one more time to see if there's anybody else who wants to share with us their work or their progress or their needs. Feel free to raise your virtual hand. I see one from Patrick Lee. Patrick, you're live. Just unmute. Let's see, Patrick, you're still muted. There you go.
Okay, good. Yeah. Yeah, Patrick is my name. I'm from Toronto, Canada. So I don't know how helpful I could be to the group, but I've been working with the city government, the provincial government, and many healthcare facilities to help them to source the PPE materials. So yeah, if I could be of any help, please reach out to me. I'm here available.
That's great. Please put your information in the chat box, an email address, a phone number, whatever's convenient, along with some key terms that someone, if they're searching the contacts list, that they can find you under. So if it's PPE supplier or something like that,
okay,
go ahead and put that in there. People can find you and make contact and make clear where you are as well, so they have that as an option. That's great. Thank you for that call, Patrick. Appreciate that.
Sure.
Let's see. I thought I saw Deborah Livna's hand go up. There she is. Deborah, you're live with us. Welcome. Just unmute your mic.
Just wanted to say before the end, you've been amazing. You can be a TV or a radio announcer for your next career. Yeah.
Well, we're so thankful for this whole community that's come together. It's been amazing, and to have people come on and present the content like we've had today has just been incredible. So thanks for that, Deborah.
I'm going to look for all the links to see how we can connect people. And this is just a fantastic resource. So,
please do. And also, you know, we've been sharing these with other community partners. I know we've mentioned this other calls, but for example, Pure Michigan Business Connect is maintaining a list of all of the things that various groups here are digging up. I know a lot have putting information to that list. So folks can go out and find that. Deborah, thanks for your call. We'll take one more ask for any other comments, questions that you may have before we wrap for the day. It's been another great time with you on COVID Connect, and I really thank you all for your participation and interest and wonderful thoughts. It's another great day. Keep being safe out there. Check in on those latest stay-in-place orders, which are loosening a little bit. And keep watching those graphs. Well, with that, thank you all for your time. Have a great day. We'll see you next Friday at 2 p.m.